Hello everyone, I'm Kathan Shukla. Today I'll be talking about mechanism for educational excellence in India. Uh, so research has suggested that educational outcomes in Indian contexts have been below expected levels. For example, studies done by NCRT or Education Initiative, even Pratham's ACER surveys have suggested poor outcomes. Internationally, also comparison with other countries based on TIMSS and PISA results suggest, let's say, a very grim picture uh, for India. However, when people talk about moving towards solution, one gets a feeling that usually discussion revolve around students doing rote memorization, teachers not teaching well, and then teacher absence, and so discussion is around at micro level issues and mostly blaming students and teachers for the educational mess. However, in today's talk, I'll be focusing more on broader macro level issues, let's say issues at the state level or even at the center at national level. I doubt if India even has any mechanism for tackling its educational problems at macro level, mainly because the limited policy relevant knowledge base. While it is true that Indian researchers, especially researchers within postgraduate departments, they are engaged in research, and however, their research is not widely shared, and the, their studies are either shared with the funding agency, or maybe another copy could be somewhere in the department or any in the library. However, online it's not really available. So whatever little research that's available on the internet is mostly being done by researchers outside of India, or else any studies being funded by external agencies. So one gets a feeling that the Indian states, as well as the state national center government, they are not really serious enough to develop indigenous pool of research in educational sector. And this is extremely disturbing because without this sort of uh, research base, it's really difficult to develop sound policies. For example, if you are the educational secretary and you have some, let's say, 1 crore fund, how would you invest? Would you invest in, let's say, childcare for teachers? Would you invest in teachers' professional development? Would you invest in providing better infrastructure at school, physical infrastructure, or let's say IT infrastructure, or let's say um, some sort of psychological support to the students? So there can be thousands of things that you could invest, but then what will be your priority? It's extremely difficult to come up with right priorities without sound research base, and that's what basically happens across Indian states. Like policymakers, they don't really have thorough research base while devising policies. So there can be one or two pilot studies, and that's it. uh, other than that uh, Other than that, they are as clueless as anyone else, because decisions are then based on individuals' gut feelings and intuitions rather than sound research. And that's, I think, a really dangerous way of devising policies. Third big issue is absence of standardized outcome measures. Now, um, this is incredibly important issue. However, there is very very little attention paid to this, and I really get surprised why people are not talking about it. Because when you don't have standardized measures, things remain vaguely defined or even undefined. For example, everybody in policy circles, in media, and among practitioners talk about poor educational quality. However, what is this poor quality? Is there any definition? And everybody talks about different things. For example, Indian states used to have this criteria like uh, in the board examination, if you score less than 35%, you are fail. Nowadays, most states have 40% cutoff. Now, this is in a way ridiculous because the test itself is unstandardized. The board examination tests are in a way just teacher made test expanded to the state level. That's all that is. So that's all they are. So what happens is that score of 30 for 1 year may not mean the same thing for score of 30 next year, because it, there can be hundreds of things going on. The test could be difficult, the student there could be newer better policy, maybe the curriculum has improved, maybe teachers as a whole have taught better, but we don't know. Nobody would know. So, and primary reason is that outcome itself is not standardized, and there is absolutely no psychometric analysis shared. Um, so we don't even know whether the tests are valid, reliable, how reliable they are, and still uh, they are high stake and critical decisions for students' future, and their career decisions are based on this sort of examination, which is highly unfair to the students, even to the teachers. That's not fair because they don't even they know that whether their teaching has improved a student outcome or not, because student outcome cannot be compared because they are not standardized. And across state there is simply not there cannot be any comparison, because one score of 30 in one state may mean something different in the another state. So this is a very troubling issue for a researcher. Next big issue is absence of highly skilled researchers. So yes, there are few premier institutes working in educational sector in India. However, they are very few in number, probably 5 to 10 at the most. So, at state level there could be one, and some states don't even have a single research premier institute. So to tackle to understand local social context, um, I don't know how things can work out without uh, desired human resource. We definitely need more people engaged into educational research activities. So cumulatively, all these factors have contributed to the inconsistency of this entire cycle that this next point talks about, the cycle of um, educational priorities and educational objectives, informing uh, which direction we need to expand our knowledge base, the direction in which we should increase funding for research, and the knowledge base which further feeds to the policy making and implementation, and based on policies then uh, educational practices in schools uh, get modified. And again, uh, knowledge from current practices add to the knowledge base, and which further modifies the policy. But this sort of cycle doesn't exist in India, in Indian context. For example, everybody complains about rote memorization done by the students. So the blame game is that students use this sort of tactics. But it is also true that the states require students to do exceptionally well in the board examinations, because board exams require, uh, based on board examinations, students get to go into career path of their choice, or even get admissions in colleges. Now, it is interesting that these board examinations primarily focus on knowledge level questions. Now, knowledge level questions require memorization. So no wonder students are memorizing, because that's a strategy, right? That's what the exams want. And the teachers also make sure that students have memorized. So it is very common in Indian school, like as a punishment, uh, teacher would just ask you to write things 5 times or 10 times, because so that you memorize. And if you memorize, you are going to do well in your exam. So it's a kind of entire ecology, educational ecology, that we have created, that encourages rote memorization. So as an objective, when even the right to education has this sort of objective that we want critical minds, so and everything sounds so utopian and idealistic. However, our practices are totally different, and and our policies are somewhere else. So there is no consistency for across all these things. So that is what we need. We need our national objectives informing uh, the area of inquiry. And by that I mean that development of knowledge base in particular area, and based on that thorough knowledge base we devise policies which further inform our educational practices, and then we continuously evaluate those practices, and which adds our knowledge base. And as we gain more knowledge, our objectives and national priorities may get modified. So this sort of cycle is extremely critical, um, in order to, and mainly because this is self-correcting cycle. Over the time, this gives you a mechanism which will correct itself, the entire system, because based on your policies, your educational practices are modified, and then you again learn from the field, and add to your knowledge, add you that knowledge to the knowledge pool, which again informs your policies. So policies get kind of refined from every cycle. So question remains that how do we do it? So in India, educational policy is primarily devised by the states. So I'd like to suggest a three-phase solution, in which at phase one, the mechanism that we just discussed, that's developed at the state level. In the phase two, we develop that sort of mechanism at the district level, and in the third phase, we we move it beyond districts, and let's say move to talukas or even clusters. So the basic idea is to have a core team of world-class interdisciplinary researchers working together for solving states' educational issues. And let's say researchers who are from the field of education or several content areas, let's say some mathematicians, physicists, so in a way content experts, some linguistics, um, social scientists, in addition to having statisticians and psychometrics, metricians, and also having psychologists, economists, sociologists, all working as a team for solving social, various educational issues. And this sort of interdisciplinary team is extremely important, because the academic outcomes uh, can be um, affected by not just what goes in the school, or not just the factors also related to schools, but there can be so many numerous factors, from child's health to economic condition to social discrimination, and there are numerous factors. And so we cannot look education in isolation. It is very much part of all other socio-economic factors. So we have this interdisciplinary approach will help us deepen our understanding of issues. So, and by policy relevant knowledge production, I basically mean that we have this um, different stages of knowledge production. In the first stage, that team conducts very small scale efficacy studies for all various possible interventions. Intervention By intervention, I basically mean that any working hypothesis that we have that may affect our outcome of interest, let's say academic outcomes. Any working hypothesis can be, for example, it can be teachers' professional development. So we want to understand how professional development affects student outcomes. So professional development of teacher, that can be one intervention. So conducting this sort of small experiments and then just examining whether we are getting positive outcomes or not. If we do get positive outcomes, we can replicate the study across all different social contexts. So in stage 2, that's what I suggest. In different social contexts, we examine effect of the intervention. And now we have broadened the experiment. And in stage 3, we further extend the experiment, but of course it has to uh, the results have to suggest that we are getting positive results in stage 1, stage 2 consistently. So once that is established, we can conduct experiment on the entire state representative sample. So now we have this large scale study going on. And when stage 3 results also suggest positive outcomes, then that intervention can be considered um, formally as part of the policy, can be integrated into policy. So this sort of social experiment um, can inform policy then. So now the policies have really strong basis, and one also has to make sure that the research design has to be such that we have causal inferences. Now that can be a kind of technical issue, uh, but that's something to keep in mind. And another benefit of this sort of um, step-by-step approach is the main benefit is that the entire system gets some time to uh, adjust to whatever's newer policy is coming. So the moment people know that okay, stage 3 intervention has also worked and something has worked for stage 2 similarly, so people are already ready that this can be a policy. So system in a way gets some buffer time to adjust itself with the newer changes. Currently what we see um, is that suddenly a policy is brought out just like that, um, and so the entire system, let's say one state, let's say state of Gujarat, where I'm from, it, it has over 6 crore of people. So now this huge population, you cannot expect people to adjust to the policy, this newer policy overnight. You at least need few years um, for people to digest a newer policy. So this sort of stage by stage approach helps people adjust to newer policy, which is extremely important. Now again, coming back to our point, the In addition to research, the interdisciplinary team needs to regularly brief state level administrators and ministers. So, because most of the policy making is done by the uh, IAS and IAS officers across states, and it is very likely that these people may have absolutely no background in educational research. So it is very important that they get continuously constant briefs. In fact, I'd like to suggest that the administrators need to be in ingredient part. It need to be internal part of this research team, so that they also can see like can understand research more deeply, as well as their implementation can go smoothly. Third big area that this team can contribute uh, to is communication to the public. Now, researchers usually are good at communicating with each other, but if they talk to people, common people who are not researchers, and engage through media, through sharing their ideas in let's say blogs or in newspapers or in also going on TV talking about educational issues, that's extremely important, so that the common people, because education is the kind of area where everybody is directly or indirectly a stakeholder. Somebody could be a parent, somebody could be a student, everyone has some sort of experience with the education system. So everyone, it's really important to engage with everyone, because it is their issue as well. And when people know what's going on, what sort of research what sort of intervention is working, what sort of intervention is not working, so the policy implementation becomes more easier, the environment for policy becomes conducive to it, and that's the key for success of any policy. Lastly, the big area is teaching and mentoring the next generation of researchers. And this is also very important, because in the phase 2 we want to extend the entire mechanism to the cluster level, and so for which we need great interdisciplinary researchers. So they will come from this sort of teaching and mentoring to younger crop. So we can also have some system where this younger generation of researchers can directly be absorbed into district level research activities. Um, and of course, for entire state, um, uh, for a team of 20 or 25 researchers, it may not be possible to cover entire state. So for that, it's extremely important to engage with the universities which are currently working already, and the graduate departments of this universities currently, um, right now the tenure track is mostly based on the number of years that faculty members have served. um, I'm not sure how changing that can be even be a policy, a possibility or not. However, we can always have a kind of tenure track for younger newly hired people, that we give more weightage to their contribution to the research and give them incentives for research, so they can also contribute to the research production and creation of the knowledge pool. In addition, the leadership structure of these institutions need to be re-examined, um, especially the head of the departments, the deans, the vice chancellors. Their um, incentive, they right now do not have um, any incentive to increase research output of their institutions, and this has to be worked out. There has to be some mechanism where we link incentives given to this um, leaders, educational administrative leaders, their incentives, and we link that to the research output of the institute. I think that will create, some sort of um, positive attitude towards research as an institution also, which can further strengthen the research pool. So then the idea for phase two is to develop entire research capacity at district level. So just as we did in phase one at state level, we replicate that sort of mechanism at district level. And then in phase three, we replicate entire research capacity, research infrastructure at the taluka or even cluster level. So, of course, this may take time, but right when we begin the very first step, we have this broader, longer plan in mind that, okay, after uh, currently we are, let's say, beginning at state level research infrastructure, but in next 5 to 7 years, we want the entire capacity to be uh, in functional mode at the district level, and then further in next 15 years everything would be pushed uh, would be down at taluka levels. So now each taluka at that level they'll be solving, studying, examining their own issues, and then coming up with policy recommendations. So that creates the infrastructure in which policies are so close to the field, and um, its policies are designed based on systematic understanding of educational issues, and also it gives a scope of flexibility uh, for the policy design, and that is very critical for social science to have flexibility within policies. Now let's see what will be the role of central government. So it's simple. It's just establishing national objectives for inquiry, in a way setting up the educational priorities for research, then funding research across states, um, even at least partially, and funding for research infrastructure as well, and also the programs that work. So if one intervention has worked for one state, at least consider it as working hypothesis for other states, and then give incentives to that state to do that sort of examination, and then coordinating research across states. Just make sure all states are uh, studying their own issues on their own, and assisting on one state if it's finding some difficulties, and helping states learn from each other, and also maintaining some sort of uniformity across educational curriculum and student outcomes in general, and also making sure like students from one state um, can have easy transition when they move to the other states. Just to sum everything up, in this presentation I presented a mechanism at macro level which corrects itself over time. In this mechanism, national objectives are connected with a development of knowledge base, which is further connected to policymaking and educational practices. And when we continuously evaluate practices in schools, our knowledge base gets updated. Um, this this mechanism, I also showed how we can extend it to the taluka level, and so get it deeply penetrated in field. So I welcome your questions, comments, any suggestions that you have, or any other ideas. If you have, please feel free to share, and do visit www.globiansperspective.com. That's it for now. Thank you.